Good morning, everybody. It's Saturday, the 10th of January 2026, and the fact that we're in January means that we are close to self-assessment deadline. So, self-assessment deadline for the 24-25 tax year is just 3 weeks away. So, quite a big video today, and because obviously lots of people will be looking at annual allowance and tax returns, I'm going to go through the following things. So, firstly, for those people who are not necessarily using an accountant, what to put on your tax return if you have an annual allowance charge. Secondly, what if the scheme pays and what does that mean? And thirdly, how much would that cost? And I'm going to go to my modeler for that. Fourthly, if you are using Scheme Pays, just going to go through the logistics of how you actually go about applying in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and then separately look at the Scottish paperwork because it's subtly different. And then finally, but really importantly, is what about 25-26? Obviously, lots of you will be concentrating on the current tax year, 24-25, because you've got to self-assess during the next 3 weeks if you've not already done so. But it's also a really good time just to kind of take stopgap of what's going to be different in 25-6. And people that thought 24-5 is going to be bad may be disappointed to hear that 25-6 may also be bad as well. But there are still a few months left of the tax year remaining, so it's possible that you might be able to do something about it, but more of that later. So I'm just going to dive straight in. So all of the figures are from my tool. And if you've not registered for the tool, and there is a completely free tool that will give you pension growth for GPs or hospital doctors in the 23-24, 24-25 and 25-26 tax years, whether or not you're in 2015 only or 1995/15 or 2008/15, and it's the only free tool currently available that gives 2008 growth after the NHS employers / first actuarial one was pulled in December after we highlighted an error to them. So anyway, onwards and upwards, and we're going to go through the paperwork that you need to report a charge. So I've done several videos on my tools already, so I'm not going to kind of go through all the basics of how to work out your growth, and you can watch the previous videos on my channel for that. So we're just going to assume that you do have a tax charge and look at how you go about reporting it on your tax return, etc. So going to dive into the tool, and I will just kind of run through the very basics of the tool very quickly. So this is a member that's used Concierge, so this expresses all the information that's on the total reward statements, because for Concierge members we've got all of the data from the TRS, which is a lot more data than people put into the model normally. We can present all of that to them, including their McLeod choices, and just as a reminder, McLeod isn't about what happened before 2015 and it's not about what happened after 2022. It's about this bit in the middle, the so-called remedy years. And so when you come to retire, you'll choose whether you want those remedy years in your old scheme or your new scheme. But one of the criticisms that I always have had about TRS is that because virtually nobody retires from the 2015 scheme at state pension age, it becomes very difficult to look at those figures and make head or tail of them. So what we can do for you as part of the concierge service is represent that data to you based on the ages that you want to retire. So for example, if you wanted to go at 57 in both parts of the scheme, you can look at the pension that you've accrued so far and see how much of that pension and lump sum you're going to keep from each of the schemes and what that would turn into, and also what that would be in terms of net pension terms. The other problem with TRS is that it's pretty difficult for members to be able to compare the difference between pension and lump sum. So the 2015 scheme doesn't come with any automatic lump sum, which makes it difficult because everyone will value pension and lump sum differently. So one way to make that comparison a little bit easier is if you equalise the lump sum. So for example, if you turn some of that pension into lump sum, so the the lump sums are the same, and then you can compare which one is better, and that will be different for everyone and depend on the ages that you want to retire, etc. Again, I'm not going to cover that in this video. So for people not using the paid versions, you can still get growth for free. You very simply put in your pay values over these 3 years. You'll need to tell it how much service you've got in each of the schemes. You'll need to give it some payslip data from a current payslip, so the December payslip, and then this is going to output your basic growth. Now, this video is going to be done on the basis that the person has not received their official pension saving statements, but it's really easy. If you have, you simply just change that to yes. You put in these 4 values from your pension saving statements. Now, one of the commonest questions that I've seen in the forums has been, why is the 23-24 1995 value in brackets? And if it is in brackets, that's a good thing. It means that you've had negative growth, and that negative growth can be offset against the 2015 growth up to a maximum of 0. I say it's a good thing. It's a good thing that it's now recognised. It's something that I've been campaigning on for about a decade. But what it reflects is that your pension value in that year was seriously eroded because your pay failed to keep up with inflation. And so kind of a really important take-home message from that is the, destruction in the value of your pension over the last 15 years has been almost entirely driven by the reduction in your pensionable pay. But at least now we get some recognition where the pay cut is below inflation. That will feed into the 1995 estimate, which means you're kind of not taxed twice on that. So, but we'll just change this back to that you've not received it, and we're going to base this on an estimate, because I know there are lots of people, sadly, in that position. So if we scroll down to what I call the accountant's view, we'll go past the scheme pays, which I'll cover in just a minute. And if we go to this bit, which is the self-model estimates of NHS pension savings. So we've given it our pensionable pay values, or they've been done by the Concierge service. We've told it what our taxable income is. So for this example, we're talking about the self-assessment that's coming along on Jan 31st, 2026. So that's 3 weeks away from today, or when it was recorded. We're looking at the 24-25 tax charge. So we can see here the value that's been given for taxable income is 215,300. And taxable income and threshold income are concepts that really get people confused. There's a taxable pay helper in the premium modeler here that will help you start with your taxable pay on your pay slip, and that's already got pension contributions deducted. Then you can add in all your other taxable pay that's on your tax return and take off the relevant allowances, take off any private pension contributions. In this example it's 0, but not your NHS pension contributions, and various other little bits, and you end up with a threshold income. And again, I'm kind of not going to go through the mechanics of that. Did a good video with the excellent Andy Powell, who's a veteran specialist medical accountant, been doing doctors' tax returns for 30 years, and he goes through that, and his video is within the model if you turn the help videos on. So we can see here this member is tapered. They've exceeded 200,000 threshold income, and because they're tapered, they then need to go to the next test, which is adjusted income, and the adjusted income is going to be the threshold income plus the growth. In this example, big pension growth of 110k, and that means they've got an adjusted income that is 325, and that is tapered their annual allowance down to 27,298, and this is a figure that we're going to need later for the paperwork. This is the so-called in-year tapered annual allowance. And I mentioned the negative growth for 23-24, which is going to be a pretty common feature for certainly for hospital doctors, in particular consultants, because they had a really poor pay award in 23-24 that was well below inflation. But what that will mean is that for many people, it will generate carry forward. So this member it's got an estimated minus 48 in one scheme plus 41 in the other scheme. You add those together with a floor of 0. And that's meant that this member's got a full £60,000 of carry forward, because obviously the allowance also went up to from 40 to 60 in that year, and so that is kind of taken the bite to some extent out of this tax charge. So we can see here that the members got that 60,000 here. They've got the tapered allowance of 27. That means they've got an available annual allowance of 87,298 against those pension savings. And we come to the taxable excess, and you can see here where it says taxable excess, and this is SA 101 question 10, and this is the first bit that we're going to need for our tax return. So on the left hand side of the screen, and I'll put the links into all the relevant bits, we can see here this is the amount saved for your pension in the period covered by the tax return in excess of the annual allowance. And I'm going to apologise for my handwriting because it's absolutely awful, and that's why I get my accountant to do this for me. Well, it's one of the reasons I get my accountant to do it for me. So we're just going to write 22,806, and that's this value here, and then that's the relevant box that it goes in here. Now, for this member, their marginal rate is 45%. They're into the additional rate, and that means the annual allowance tax charge is 10,263. So if we don't fill anything in here, that will mean that that bit of the tax charge will be paid via self-assessment. And if you're paying via self-assessment via cash, what will also happen is you will find that another 50% on that tax charge will be added on for payment on account. Whereas if you pay it via Scheme Pays, there isn't that alteration, so there'll be nothing else added onto Scheme Pays. Now you're not kind of paying extra in the long run. It just means you're paying it on account, and then that amount you pay on account will come out of next year's tax charge. So that basically, if you're paying cash, assuming that your AA tax charge is going to be similar for next year, which is a bit of a silly assumption, and I'm not sure it's a very fair way to treat people that are paying cash, but I don't make the rules. I'm just explaining to you how our tax system works. But let's assume that this member is going to fully use the Scheme Pays facility and do all of the 10,263, which is just 45% of this value. They would simply write that value in here, so 263 and 10,000. So that's that full value against Scheme Pays. Now PSTRs, I'm not going to fill that in here because there's different PSTRs for the different nations of the scheme, but what I will do is I'll put them in the YouTube notes at the bottom. So this is the SA 101. This is kind of the supplementary page where you report this pension tax charge, page 4. But because we've used Scheme Pays, and because we've only been able to give one PSTR, and you can see down here that it's the Scheme Pays loan will go against two different schemes, we're also going to write something on our main tax return. So I'm just going to go back to the SA 100 for this year, which is this document here. And you can see here on page 9, or page 9 on the PDF, but it's labelled page TR7 here. I've put in some supplementary text. So I've said we've declared that this tax charge being paid by Scheme Pays of 10,263, and then what I've done is I've taken the Scheme Pays split from the modeler here. So we've said that 5764 is going to be against this PSTR, and that's the PSTR in England and Wales for 1995, and then I've said it's going to be against this PSTR, which is the PSTR for the 2015 scheme, and that's going to be 4499, which is that value there, and they total 10,263. So this is just the opportunity to tell them what the Scheme Pays split is, and that's in the Scheme Pays notes in a couple of the nations as well. So I've mentioned Scheme Pays a couple of times because I know lots of people, including myself, are forced into using that facility, because if you have charges year after year, it can become very difficult to pay them from cash. None of this, of course, is financial advice, and none of it is a recommendation to use Scheme Pays, but I will just take a second to explain Scheme Pays to you, because I think it's quite misunderstood. So just to give you some worked examples, and bear in mind this is a worked example for this member who's got this charge, and it will be based entirely on their age and when they want to retire, etc. But exactly what Scheme Pays is it's essentially a interest-bearing loan that is then debited against your pension at retirement. So if we remember, for this member, we're talking about £10,200 tax charge, and we don't get to choose which scheme we want it to come out of. It's based on the proportion of the growth. So in this case, there's about £5,700 coming from the 1995 scheme and about £4,500 coming from the 2015 scheme. So if you've got the gold modeler, you can see how that is going to work for you at the ages that you want to retire. So if we just take that example, so here is this £2,663 charge, and in this year this pensionable pay was 158, so the members paid almost £20,000 in employee contributions, but the employee contributions, but the employer was also put in 23.7%, a mixture of what your local employers put in and the central contributions. But we don't have a pot. All of this is kind of pretend money, but what we get out of it is a promise of a pension. But what pension we get out is not straightforward. So although the annual allowance assumes that you will take both pensions at your normal retirement ages, of course that is frequently not the case. So the two commonest causes of reduction will be early retirement. So for example, this member was born in 1979 and they've said that they want to go at 58 and take partial or retire and return and work till 60, but you can change these values to whatever you want, and the corresponding values for the Scheme Pays loans and the pension will also change, because that 2015 pension in particular is continuing to grow by 1.5% above inflation until retirement. But if we assume, for example, there it's 57 and 61, we can see the proportions of the pension that you're going to keep, and then you can see the value of the Scheme Pays loan and the actual reduction. So for here, we've started off with pension earned in that year, contributed, of course, by the pay award, which I like to think is a partial pay correction to our massive pay erosion. But we can see here that in nominal terms, the pension would have gone up at 9913 unreduced, so i.e. if you'd retired at state pension age and 60 from 1995, but we're going to take away 510 from the Scheme Pays loan, so that's after interest and is accrued with, that'll be the reduction at the ages that you want to retire, and then this is the reduction for early retirement. So in terms of what you get to keep, the estimate for the pension that you've accrued just in the 24-25 tax year is going to be £7,517 for every year of your retirement, and of course that's index linked, and all of these figures are in real terms. And there's also been a lump sum reduction as well, both from the early retirement and also from Scheme Pays. So what we've earned this year is contributed towards another £15,000 of lump sum. So I think when a lot of people kind of plug in the numbers, they may find that Scheme Pays isn't as horrendous as they think. So, you know, this was a kind of 10,000 odd charge, and it's led to a £510 reduction in pension. Now, slight kind of health warning, all of these are just estimates. Scheme Pays is an interest-bearing loan. Now, for the 2015 bit, the interest is not so important because the 2015 pension is going to be growing by interest plus 1.5%. But in terms of the 1995 loan, it's all a bit more, it's a bit more grey, because no one knows what's going to happen to our pay between now and retirement. Is our pay going to keep up with retirement? Is it going to grow above? i.e., are we going to restore our pay further, or is it going to be sub-inflationary? So all of that's a bit unknown. And the other unknown is this thing called the SCAPE interest rate. So the interest rate on this loan is CPI, or inflation, plus something called SCAPE. And SCAPE is something that the government sets and reviews every 4 years. It's currently 1.7%, so that's better than it has been recently. It's been at or over 3% in the last decade. But this SCAPE rate will be subject to change every 4 years. So these are, a decent estimates, but they're not definitive, and no one has a crystal ball and can tell you exactly what Scheme Pays is going to cost. And of course, as I said before, none of this is financial advice. None of this is advice to use Scheme Pays or otherwise, but it's if you choose to use Scheme Pays, that is how much it's going to cost you. And then what we will go through now is how do you actually go about applying for it. So we're going to come back to what I called the accountant's view, and we're going to start off in England and Wales, and it's an identical form, more or less, for Scotland and Northern Ireland. So obviously read all of the bit at the beginning. Scheme Pays is a loan. You need to read the paperwork properly before you sign your life away. But we'll just kind of go through in my very terrible handwriting what you would end up writing in this. So obviously you're going to be filling in all of your personal details here at the top. But then in terms of Part B, this is kind of where the meat of it is, the election for the relevant tax year. So we're looking at the 24-25 tax year. The self-assessment deadline for that is 3 weeks away, as I said, January 31st. The Scheme Pays deadline is going to be July 2026. So the first question is this a change due to the McLeod remedy? So for this tax year, the answer to that is no. We're talking about 2024-25, so I'm just going to put that in there. Is this a change? No, this is a new Scheme Pays election, but as I said, this is an estimate, so I'm going to tick that for it being an estimate. And of course, you've got 4 years to adjust this if, when your form, your brown envelope arrives, the values are different, so you've got 4 years to correct it. But my advice for estimates is always try and estimate what your charge will be, rather than putting in an election with £1 or £100 or whatever north of the border. It's better to estimate it, try and get it as correct as you can, rather than just to put a small nominal amount in, because there might be interest implications if, for example, you put in £1 and then you've got a £20,000 tax charge and you don't get the paperwork for a couple of years, and it can just all get a bit messy, and it's a bit of a grey area who would be liable for that interest because of the scheme maladministration that's going on at the moment. So then we're asked for the total amount that you want against the 1995 scheme. So that's what these Scheme Pays splits were. So we just scroll up to here, so we can see here the 1995 section was 5764. So I'm going to put that there, 5764. And then is this a change? No. What's the value against the 2015 scheme? And the answer here was 4499. Now, I've seen some horrendous cases where people have just thought, well, I'd quite fancied all to come out of the 2015 scheme and not out to the 1995 scheme, and then they've been rejected and they've ended up with fines and interest, etc., from HMRC. So you do have to kind of stick to the rules here and apportion it in relation to the growth in the schemes and the charge. It's not just simply, I want to put all 10,263 against one and not the other. So this member is tapered, so they're going to need to tick this box. And then if you have a tapered annual allowance, what is it? So that was this value here, so 27,298. So we can put that 27,298, and then the marginal rate for this member is 45 as a high earner because they're well above the additional rate threshold. So we've filled in all of this bit at the top as well. And then there's just putting your scheme membership number that's on your pension saving statements or your pay slips or your TRS. Are you going to retire? No, because this member was born in 78 and that's not relevant either. And then read the declaration and then sign and date it. I would always advise emailing it so you've got proof that it's gone rather than sending it by the post, and make sure that you get an acknowledgement back that it's been received, because they have been known to go missing. So that was this member in England, but now let's just do exactly the same, but assume that this member was north of the border. So I say England, sorry, that's England and Wales, and it's also identical in Northern Ireland. So, but let's assume now that it's SPPA. So everything is exactly the same, but for this member, rather than the marginal rates being at a lower rate, they're at 47% in 23-24 and 48 for 24-25 and 25-26 because of these higher top rate of taxes. And then if we scroll to the relevant bit again, and we can see, sorry, I've gone past it. We can see here that because the marginal rate is higher at 48% here, we've got a slightly higher tax charge of 10947. So if we just scroll to the relevant bit of the form, so again, all of this stuff is going to need to be filled in. The relevant tax year is 2024, 2025. So I've still got a bit left from previously. So the amount that you want the scheme to pay. So previously we had to put a split, but in Scotland they do the split calculation for you. So the total tax charge here was 10947. So we write that in this box here, 10947. That's the bit that's come from there. Again, we've still got this issue of the tapered annual allowance. That was this value here. So we've got 27298. And the maximum rate of tax payable is going to be at the top rate of 48%, leading to that higher charge. And then again, the similar questions on the following pages. So you're not retiring, and a question about claiming your benefits, and then you just sign and date there. So that is the paperwork for Scheme Pays in each of the 4 nations. So we've covered what Scheme Pays is and how to apply for it in all 4 nations. But perhaps the kind of the raison d'etre of the modeler, and remember, if you've not registered for the modeler, you can only get it by pre-registration at bit.ly/GPFT interest, is also about looking crucially at the current tax year, because we're mid-January, there's still the rest of January, February, March and the very beginning of April potentially to do something about a tax charge. So we'll just go back to the England charge, and if you remember, we've applied for Scheme Pays at 10263, and in this year the member had growth of 110k. Now their income was 205,300, and because they'd started to model this several months ago using my modeler, they were already getting a bit nervous about the 24-25 tax year being extremely painful as it is. So they've already started to reduce their taxable income, but they've still found themselves with a threshold income of 205,500. Now, as I said, the growth is still very high because this member is incremented across 2 years, and so it was 110 last year and it's 101 this year. But despite the fact that the growth has come down 10,000, and despite the fact that their taxable income has also come down 10,000, if we look down to their tax charge, instead of it being 10,000, it has tripled almost to £29,101. So an enormous tax charge of £29,000. So what's going on here? And so if we kind of come back to the discussion that we had just before about the 23-24 tax year, is the difference is carry forward. Okay, so the 24-25 is going to be a horrendous year for lots of consultants because of the pay awards, and lots of people will have big tax charges, but they may also extend into being bad into the 24-25 tax year. And the difference is carry forward. So because in 23-24 this member had a full £60,000 carry forward that helped shield them from an even bigger charge in 24-25, the unused carry forward in the 24-25 tax year is zero because they had an annual allowance charge, right? And because of that, and because this member is tapered, even though they weren't as tapered as previously, that has meant that their total allowance is only 36,610 because they didn't benefit from this carry forward, and that has meant a very large tax charge. So the whole point of this modeler really is, by knowing this information during the tax year, you can potentially do something about it. So I'm just going to talk about just quickly 2 strategies for this member using this member's numbers. Okay, so this is a feature of the gold modeler, and I've spoken about this before on other videos, and this has been on my YouTube and on my Twitter account. So this was a chart that I tweeted based on the IFS charge a year and a half ago or so, and what it showed is that although post-income tax, post-tax earnings are progressive, because of the tax cliff at 200k earnings, people can fall off that cliff and end up being better off earning a lot more money. But the problem is that this graph was just individual to this member in one tax year, 24-25, at that earnings and those growth. But the chart is going to look different for every member in every tax year, and that's why you need to address it in each tax year. And so the tax year that we're worried about now is the 25-26 tax year, which is the tax year that we're in. So we can see, for example, that currently, as things stand, this member, as I said, is due for a £29,101 tax charge. But let's see what happens if we change their income, because this is a chart and you can choose exactly where you want to be on this tax charge. So, for example, if we say instead we want to be at 199,500, so £500 under that tax cliff, we can see instead of having a tax charge of 29,101, it's come down to 18,576. So that tax charge has come down by £10,525. So income's gone from 205,500 to 199,600. So income has come down 6,000. That's gross income. Yeah, so you might expect to see roughly half of that, so £3,000 less. But despite post-tax income only being £3,000 less, the annual allowance tax charge has come down by £10,525. Now, let's just say you're in a position where, for whatever reason, you've reduced your taxable income to the minimum it can be reduced, or let's say you're towards the end of the tax year, and we've still got 2.5 months yet left, but let's say there's no other way you can reduce your taxable income below 2.5 and 500, then the other option is to consider a private pension contribution. And I know that sounds crazy. This member's already staring down the barrel of a £29,000 tax charge. Why on earth would they want to put into a private pension? And the answer is because that might be able to get their threshold income down below the 200 tax cliff. So, for example, this member's 5,500 over. So let's just say they put 6,000, and that's the gross amount, into a SIP, and we can see that the tax charge has come down from that 29,101 all the way down to 21,276, including the tax charge on that SIP. So the total tax charge has come down 7825. So this member's managed to put £6,000 into a SIP, and obviously there's kind of all the advantages of a SIP versus the NHS pension, the differences in terms of inheritability and various other factors, and yet their total tax liability has gone down and not up. Now, again, none of this is financial advice. This is just an educational tool just to show you the interactions of tax, tapering, private pension contributions, income modification, and if considering a strategy like this is the sort of thing that you might want to talk about with your accountant or tax advisor, or IFA if you're considering a SIP. Now, of course, some people, this is all completely doable. For other people, they can't do this themselves. So if you need help with the top bit, getting to the point of getting an estimate of all your growth, you can use our Concierge service, which just costs £108.80 or £99 plus VAT on top of the price for the premium modelers. For some people, they will need an accountant, or they will choose to use an accountant. I mean, I obviously have expertise in this, but declaration of interest, I use an accountant, and I've used an accountant since a couple of years after starting being a consultant for the last 12 or so years, because it's just easier, and then I'm covered by using an accountant. So if people need recommendations for an accountant, I'll also put a link into Medic's Money, because Medic's Money will vet all of the accountants, and they'll show you people that have got expertise in this, because not all accountants will fully understand the annual allowance and tapering, because it's not their bread and butter. But those that have got large numbers of medics on their books, this very much is their bread and butter. So thank you very much for your attention. Sorry it was a slightly longer video. As I said, if you've not already got the tool, please do register bit.ly/GPFT. Please do not have nightmares over annual allowance. I know it's complicated. We all wish it wasn't here, but it is. But you do have options, including Scheme Pays. It's much better just to get on top of this, get all your paperwork in on time, and not bury your head in the sand and hope it will go away. It won't go away. So please don't have nightmares. Feel free to use my free tool or the premium tools, and get on top of it, and then you'll sleep much easier at night. That's great. Many thanks.